So just the other day, not that long ago, we had a whole bunch of people, well, it seemed like a whole bunch of people. I had relatives visiting from the state of Wyoming in our living room, and we're all kind of sitting around chewing the fat, if you will, talking a little bit. And I walked into the room, and my wife's sitting in a chair, and my cousin is there, and then I go to my wife, and she's sitting in a chair looking pretty nice and comfy, you know? So I go to my wife, and I sit on her lap. And I go up to her, I just sit on her lap, and that pretty much stops the conversations in the room. Can I put my arm around her and I go, I want for Christmas, what I really, really want are two things. You know this is going to be good. I want two things for Christmas. And I'm really glad nobody noticed I was calling her Santa. That wait, you calling me fat? That wasn't the case. That never even came up. So I want two things for Christmas. I want a beautiful, wonderful, amazing woman to be my wife, and I want a pony. And I looked at her and I said, well, 2 out of 1 ain't, or 1 out of 2 ain't bad. And I got up saying, excuse me, everyone, I'm gonna go feed my pony. Now, you would expect conflict to ensue. That's what you would expect. Not my wife. No, not my wife a bit. Here's what she did. As my cousin's yelling, oh, that was so mean, my wife goes, yes, that was awesome. And she gave me a high five. Okay, that's how my wife is. She gave me a high five. She has that type of humor. We can have fun that way, and we can laugh together. And we have because she does not have a hypersensitive spirit. She doesn't take things personally, which is important. We talked about that last week, how you need to have a thick skin if you're going to be a person of mercy. If you're going to offer people mercy and offer people grace, you got to have a thick skin. You can't be a hypersensitive person. And she also knows there are other things in life to fight about. Okay. And amen from my wife. There are other things in life to fight about. There's a lot of things to fight about. Okay, even if you're watching the news, just over the past 7 days, there has been a big upheaval regarding the missionaries with Ebola virus contracted coming into the United States, to the point that you get people like Donald Trump and a few other big, very popular, successful, outspoken people saying Christian missionaries should just not go overseas. They should just stay here because we need help more than they do. Why go overseas? If they do go overseas, then just stay there and count the risks as they come. And they're actually saying these things. Why go overseas when we need you here? Just stay here. It's safer here. It's better here. We need your help here. Serve here. And now other people are rising up saying, how dare you be so centric to say that we're the only place that needs mission? We need to send people. And if they get sick or hurt, we should bring them home and try to help them and try to, and in fact, those 2 missionaries that got the Ebola virus are basically cured of it. And so there's this big old fight that has been going on, and people go back and forth on that issue. And it's been really brutal, actually, watching the name calling and the stuff going out regarding, oh, Donald Trump, you're such a jerk. And he's like, well, you guys are being unrealistic regarding the dangers of third world countries. And back and forth, their arguments are going. And each one's calling each other's names, and each one's calling each other naive. And of course, conflicts only exist outside of the church. That church fight too. Some churches fight over doctrine. Some churches fight over theology and different interpretations of Scripture. And some churches fight over whether or not what place divorce plays in, homosexuality plays in, women pastors, and on the fights continue to go. But of course, churches aren't limited to just fights about doctrine and Bible interpretation, are they? No, there's plenty of things to fight about within the church that have nothing to do with doctrine, nothing to do with sin issues or biblical interpretation. They can be serious issues, like, gee, do we help orphans or do we help widows, but we don't have the money to do both? Which one do we help? And then people take sides and they start fighting. It could be minor issues, almost inconsequential, insignificant issues. What color are the chairs? What time should we meet for service? Is denim appropriate for worship services? And on the arguments can go for that. In case you're wondering, he's wearing jeans. Yeah, for that point, to see how many people would raise a stink. It's that type of a thing. That they can be big issues, they can be small issues. What type of music should we have? If so help me, if Rachel breaks out hip hop, we're done. I'm not going to that church ever again. Personally, I would love to see my wife try to do hip hop. I think that would be fun all by itself. Have her come out with some bling and a little bit of hat, tilt sideways, just kind of trying to bust it. I think that'd be fun. Doing a little Lecrae. Wouldn't that be great? But people are like, that doesn't belong in the church, and back and forth the fighting goes. See, there's lots of things that people get passionate about. There's lots of things people fight about in life, fight about at their job, fight about in politics, fight about in church, fight about in their families, fight about in their friendships. All over the place, there's plenty of things to fight about. In fact, this can lead us to a fact that everybody just needs to be aware of. You're going to have conflict. It is going to happen. Somebody's going to get hurt. Somebody's going to fail. Somebody's going to misunderstand. Somebody somewhere is going to get angry. Someone's going to take things personally. It's going to happen. And it amazes me how many times people do not expect this to happen when they're dating someone. When they're ready to get married and they say, I'll date this person, I'm going to marry this person, and we're going to be happily ever after. And let me just burst that bubble now. There is no happily ever after when two sinners get married. That's just how it is, okay? You got two sinners saying, I do. You're not going to get a happily ever after out of that. And if you go into the marriage expecting that the marriage will make me happy, this relationship will make me happy, this will be what my happiness will come from, now my life will be full and complete, what will later happen is you will end up thinking something along the lines of, have I married the wrong person because I'm not happy? Have I made a mistake? And it amazes me that when that type of conflict enters the marriage, the person always thinks, have I married the wrong person? They never ask, am I the wrong person? Am I the one where the problem lies? Am I not being the right person in this relationship here? They never go that way. Conflicts usually tend to be blame the other person. In fact, when you see people fighting, you tend to say, well, what's this all about? Well, this person did. They don't start with, well, I goofed up by, and they're not accepting my apology. I don't hear that fight anywhere. I don't hear that very often. That I said sorry, and they're saying, no, you're not, and I don't see that often. It happens occasionally. But it's not that often. I don't see that. I usually see blame. This person did. This person did that, whatever the case may be. Okay, and so just the facts is we are going to have conflict. You're going to have conflict at work because it involves sinners. You're going to have conflict in your family because it involves sinners. You're going to have conflict in your marriages because it involves sinners. You're going to have conflict at church because church involves sinners, right? And what's going to happen? And if you decide to be by yourself, you're going to have conflict because if you're by yourself, you already have within that dynamic a sinner. And you might be like, how do you have conflict with yourself? Well, here's what's happening. You bring with yourself your own internal drama and conflict, and if you isolate completely that way, now your conflict's with God who says don't be that way. Because you can't reach out as a witness to anyone if you're all by yourself being all hermit style. You have conflict, you're just in self-denial. Okay, so whenever there's one or more people present, automatically you're going to have conflict right off the get-go. So if you're single, guess what? You're going to have conflict. If you're married, you're going to have conflict. Divorced, you're going to have conflict. Separated, conflict. Widowed, conflict, whatever. Okay, we are going to have conflict. And what James is trying to be doing for us today is James is going to be teaching us profoundly about conflict. He is going to give us amazing insight. And he's coming from a wealth of experience. Because after all, his older brother was Jesus. And Jesus, of course, was no stranger to having conflict in his life. Right? Not only he had conflict all the time with the religious leaders, with different people, and on it went. Jesus had conflict. In fact, there was even a point when James himself was a conflict with Jesus, being against Jesus' ministry, thinking Jesus was going cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs and wanted him to come home. And he and his other brothers and his mother Mary all went to Jesus saying, come home, you need to stop doing this ministry thing. And so even James was in conflict with Jesus. James eventually turns around after Jesus rose again from the dead after his crucifixion and started being an amazing Christ follower, believing Jesus being God, not just an older brother, but God in the flesh. And then James became a pastor at a church in which city? Do you remember? Jerusalem. And of course, Jerusalem, they never have conflict there. Yeah, Jerusalem is like the epicenter of conflict. Right? It's the Disney park of conflict. It's the Middle East. They have conflict even today. They're just the Disney theme park of conflict. That's what they are. They're the bright, shining example of conflict. So James is being the pastor of the mother church in Jerusalem. He is no stranger to conflict. Whenever a theological or doctrinal dispute happened, they always turned to the mama church. It got heard in Jerusalem. That's where it would go to. In fact, even James himself, here's just, in case you ever wondered how James died, because he was killed for his faith. Eventually, the people were creating a lot of conflict. They're like, James, stop preaching Jesus, stop preaching all this stuff, stop preaching about your brother. We don't want to hear it. We don't want to hear about God. We want to do what we want, how we want. We want nothing to do with Jesus and sin and repentance and salvation. And James wouldn't shut up. He kept preaching Jesus and kept preaching Jesus. So the conflict rose into a fight, which rose into a riot. The people came over, they seized James, they brought him to the top of the temple, and they threw him off. And he didn't die from the fall. He laid there alive. So they circled around him and then rioted and beated him to death until they murdered him. So James is no stranger to conflict. He knows conflict. Obviously, he wrote this letter before he was murdered. Okay, but he is no stranger to conflict. So when he talks about fights and quarrels and wars and strife, and he begins to delve into this, know that he understands. He also has the Spirit of God upon him, because he's also writing Scripture here. So the Holy Spirit is encloaking him, enshrouding him, making sure that everything he writes in his letter is properly and authentically the Word of God. And is James coming from a wealth of knowledge, having been the brother of Jesus, taught by Jesus, and then grown up into Jesus, and grown up into the church life, and grown up to become pastor and to be used to be able to write God's word like that. So he is coming at us with a wealth of experience. So he has knowledge and experience combined together, used for God's glory, means he has godly wisdom. Okay, James is coming at us with godly wisdom. So let's see what James has to say. I love how he starts verse 1 in chapter 4. He just starts with a question. The first part of verse 1 says, what is the source of wars and fights among you? Or what is the source of quarrels and strife among you? Different translations, different words there, same question. What is the cause of all the fighting, all the conflict, all the wars, and all the anger, and all the riots that have taken place? What causes that? What's the source of that? And we all ask this question in a variety of ways. We do. We ask this question all the time. We just might not realize it. It sounds just a little bit different. Usually something like this. We see friends who hate each other, and we wonder, what happened? We see a family divided and dissolved, and we wonder, what happened there? What took place there? What caused that family to fracture? What caused those friends to divide? What caused that marriage to fall apart? And then we might even start inquiring, and we ask, so what happened there? And you ask one side, and they say, well, that person did this and that. Then if you ask the other side, they would say, no, that person did this and that. And on it goes. And we just wonder, what happened? What took place? That's where James gives us his reply. Right in the second part of verse 1 into the beginning of verse 2, he says this, don't they, the fights and quarrels and strife and divisions and wars? Don't this conflict and this fighting come from your desires that battle within you? You desire, but you do not have, so you kill. You covet, but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and you fight. So James says, what causes it? 2 words: selfishness and envy. Selfishness and envy. You could almost go back to the worldly wisdom and godly wisdom discussion of the last 2 weeks and say that it's selfish spirit and a bitter envy heart. That's what causes it. It starts with each individual person. And when you see that it says that until you kill, keep in mind this does go 2 ways. Literally, people were killing. In fact, they killed James. They killed Jesus out of selfish ambition and out of covetousness and bitterness. Okay, they killed Jesus. So there's literal murder happening there, and murder still happens. But also keep in mind, Jesus taught that what else is also murder? If you hate someone or you do not forgive someone within your heart, and you rage against them, you are committing murder within the heart. You are being unforgiving toward them. You're hating them. You are digitally, online, bashing them. You are killing their spirit, killing their reputation. You're cutting them off from your life so they're as good as dead to you. You are murdering out of selfishness, out of covetousness, out of that evilness within you. James is saying that's where it's coming from. Fights come from you. They don't come from the other person. They come from you. And then to the other person, James says the same thing. They're coming from you. Every married couple that I have talked to that are having a conflict and they can't figure out what to do with it, every situation of divorce always comes that both parties are being selfish. Both parties are at fault. Both parties, always at fault. Never an exception on that I've ever could even possibly imagine. Even when one person's having an affair, there's still fault on the other party. They didn't drive them to the affair, but they definitely contributed to the horribleness of the household. Always there's problems on both sides. There is no perfectly innocent party. Whenever there's conflict, both are at fault. So when married couples come in and I try to ask them, how are you contributing to the problem? When somebody says I'm not, I pull out James 4. James says you're wrong when you say you're not contributing. How are you contributing? And if they can't come up with a reason, they're just completely deceiving themselves. They are indeed contributing in some way. Everyone is at fault. Every conflict my wife and I have had, is she part to blame? Yes. Equally part mine to blame. I am at fault. And she is at fault. If person A insults person B and person B punches person A, does it matter who started it? Both are at fault. Person A insulted through the verbal slander, and person B sinned as well as they did physical assault. Either way, they are both guilty. So when the kids say, well, they punched me first, well, they said this, well, you're both sinning. You're both at fault now. Okay, so always, there are both parties are guilty. And the Bible really doesn't care who started it. Because the child of God is supposed to respond to that type of situation with mercy and peace and grace and forgiveness and tolerance, and as much as all possible be at peace with everyone. That is how Paul talks it out. That's how Jesus taught it out. That is how James is teaching it out. To be as much as possible, be at peace with everyone. Be people of mercy. That the conflict ends with you. Proverbs says that if anyone gives you a harsh word, you need to return a gentle word back. Okay, on and on. This is how it is. But do we do that? No. Why? Because we're selfish and we covet and we fight and we quarrel. On and on it keeps going. And so that's James's reply. That's where he starts. And this is profoundly brutal. Okay, because it means we're guilty. And we don't like hearing it. I very much, when I do counseling sessions, I very much do not start here in the first session because they don't come back. I wait till 3 sessions in. And then we build a rapport and we build trust. And then I find the most gentlest but truthful way to offer the verse. I don't just slam it at them. I get to slam it at you because we're here to learn and talk, and I don't got time to sit here for an hour trying to build up our ego so that I can slam it later. We're just going to just nail it right away. That's why I prayed like I did when we started. God, help us with this. It's going to be hard. It is going to be hard because we're not going to want to hear this. So James says in verse 2 that we desire, but we do not have, so we war. We desire, but we do not have. We want something, we don't have it. So then what are we willing to do to get it? And often that turns to fighting. Often that turns to conflict. Because we will do whatever it takes to get it. And what is it we're trying to get? So I have a 3-step method here that is very broad stroked, but I think really applies to just about every conflict. Just about. I'm not saying this is an all-inclusive, but I want to show just 3 things that I believe that we're trying to get and what is happening within our conflicts. I want to try to break it down on a semi-psychological level. So you ready? I believe tends to be happening whenever you get conflict, that ultimately conflict centers around, its focus is upon authority. That its focus tends to be on some form of authority. Who has the loudest voice? Who gets to call the shots? Who gets to make the decisions? Who's pulling the trigger? Who deserves to be heard? Who is right? That it's about authority. I think this is why people tend to raise their voices, and then the other people respond by raising their voices because they want to be the authority. They want to be the one who's heard. They want to be the one who gets their way. They're the one making the decision. They're the ones wanting to call the shot. And the other one raises their voice again, and it becomes this shouting match. Because it's all about, I'm the authority. I'm the one that's significant. I'm the one that's important. My view is what has to go forward here. I'm the one that deserves being heard. No, I don't have to hear you at all because I'm the authority. And it just escalates and escalates. Some people even passive aggressive, then they become brutally aggressive. They start thinking, how can I really sabotage them or push their buttons later? How can I really zing it to them? Well, you're just like your mom. And that's usually one that gets the women's goats. And just whatever the case may be, they just try to find a way to really zing it in. And it's all about authority, who can get their way. And what happens with this struggle for authority, it has a secondary motive hiding underneath that, and that is that conflicts have a tendency to very much be about and center toward a lack of trust. A lack of trust. We just don't trust the other person to have proper motives. We don't trust the other person to be as close to God as we are. We don't trust the other person to make the best choices. We don't trust that their ideas will work. We don't trust that they're competent. We don't trust that. I do trust me. So therefore, that makes me the authority here. So the trust tends to be the next underlying factor that's driving this authority issue. And I believe that it goes even lower than that. I believe that this continues to corkscrew into the center, that there's even something driving that trust issue. You ready for it? It's right off of James, that we're just selfish. Plain and simple, we are selfish. I want my way. My idea needs to be done. My preference is better than your preference. I don't care what you want because I care about what I want, and what I want is best. In fact, if what I want was not best, I wouldn't want it so much. So there's selfishness that is driving this. So I want what I want. I don't trust that your way will work, so I'm going to position myself as authority. That's the deconstruction of James's model of conflict. You see that fits in jobs. That fits in politics. That fits in families. When a husband and wife fight over money, they want what they want because they think it's best. They don't trust that the spouse's idea is best, and so they shout with authority. That's what happens with the political arguments and the debates. This is what happens at jobs when employees and bosses clash. This is what happens in schools. This is what happens all over the place. I've even seen families fight over reunion meetings because they don't think that this park is as good as that park, and they think what they want is best, and they don't trust that their ideas, that their other park will work, and so they are the authority, and families fight over a reunion. They're fighting over how to throw a party. I mean, think about it. But that's what happens all the time. And so this worldly conflict, that's what we're dealing with here, is worldly conflict. And worldly conflict is going to be, I'm going to structure this very much like worldly wisdom. Worldly wisdom was, here is knowledge, and that worldly wisdom was using the knowledge for yourself and self-advancement. Godly wisdom was taking the knowledge and using it to advance God's kingdom. Okay, so worldly wisdom and godly wisdom were differentiated based upon how you use knowledge. I'm going to do the same thing with conflict. Worldly conflict and godly conflict is based upon how you use conflict. Okay, so when we have conflict entered into our lives, how you use it will determine whether you're having worldly conflict or godly conflict. The goal is not, number 3, no conflict. It's not going to happen. Okay, we're going to have conflict. Yes, we are to live at peace with everyone as best as we possibly can, and conflict will come because we're dealing with sinners. Okay, so when conflict comes, the question is, how will you use the conflict? And that will determine whether it's worldly conflict you're having, evil conflict, conflict of the world, or whether it's godly conflict, conflict from above, as James calls wisdom from before. And we're going to look at godly conflict next week. We're going to be looking predominantly at worldly conflict this week. And we're going to see how well we fit the measurement of worldly conflict and go, oh darn, I need to change. And the next week we're going to see where the standard is and try to figure out how we fall short and what we can do to do better. So that's going to be our dynamic here on this part of the series for a while. And so we looked at the center and the focus of conflict. It focuses on authority, trust issues, and selfishness. We looked at that. What James looks at next on to verse 3 is the idea of motives. Okay, so conflict, worldly conflict begins with passions. We are passionate about something. I always get excited when churches have conflict. When I have pastors and friends who are in churches, they come to me and they say, our church is in conflict. I go, oh, goody. And they're like, really? I'm like, yes, I will take a conflicting church over an apathetic church any day. At least there's passion there. At least people are wanting to do something. And they're so passionate that they're willing to fight about it. That's a good place to start. I'd rather start there and try to deal with peacemaking and making wise choices and compromise rather than having a church that says, we don't care what happens, we don't feel like doing anything. I will choose conflict over apathy any day. Both are sin. Both can be sinful. Apathy definitely is sinful. Both can be very destructive in a church, but I would rather start with the conflict. So when someone calls me and says, I have a problem, there's a big fight in my church, I go, oh, goody. And I don't mean that sarcastically. Oh, goody, you got passionate people. That's good. It is easier to create peace than it is to create passion. It just is. Okay? It just is. So it starts with passions, and then comes selfish ambitions, accelerated sometimes by covetousness. Okay? Accelerated by covetousness, which sometimes looks like bitter hatred. And all of this stems from this idea of wrong motives. So here's what James says in verse 3. He says, you do not have because you do not ask. And when you do ask, you do not receive because you ask with wrong motives. Okay, you ask with wrong motives that you may spend what you get on your pleasure. That you may spend what you get on yourself. Okay, so James says the problem is wrong motives. So here's how this plays out. James says, hey, you're wanting to see something. You're wanting to have something. You don't have it. You want it. And then you don't ask God about it. You just try to take it. You just try to take the authority. You just try to take the item, or you just try to take whatever, and you want it for yourself. And so you're just going after it. Okay, in fact, the terminology here is very, very similar and almost identical to that in the book of Genesis when God tells the woman that you're going to have enmity between you and the man. You're going to want to usurp his authority. You're going to want to take it. Okay, same phrasing here, that you're going to have a problem here, probably with authority in some way, and you're going to try to take it. Okay, you're going to try to get after it, and you're not going to ask God about it. And if you do ask God about it, it's not for God's glory. It's not for God's kingdom. It's not so that people can accept Christ as Savior. It's not so that there can be healing and restoration and redemption in the family or in the job place. It's not about that at all. He is saying that if you ask God, it's because you have selfish desires. And so it can look something like this. If you don't have something and you want it, ask God for it. And if God says no, he said yes to this person, but he's saying no to you. This person asked God for a gift, an ability, an opportunity, whatever, and God said yes to them. But then you ask for that same ability, that same gift, that same opportunity, that same whatever, and he tells you no. James really wants you to say, I'm okay with that. I'm not going to get angry about it. I'm not going to try to take and steal. I'm not going to talk bad about them. I'm not going to deny biblical counsel. I'm not going to retreat into old habits of sin. I'm not going to act like I'm 10 years ago me or 30 years ago me. I'm not going to retreat into whatever habitual sin was in my past. I'm not going to regress. I'm not going to retreat away from God. I'm going to stay focused and move forward and accept the no. I'm going to accept that. In fact, I will not only accept it, I will even rejoice that God said yes to them, and they get to enjoy that, and that's awesome, and I'm thrilled for them, and I look forward to what the next chapter in my life will look like, because this no means that a page is turned and a new chapter starting in my life, and who knows what that will look like for God's glory. And to have that type of an attitude to it. But instead, that's usually not the case. It's usually not the case. If anybody says those words, they're being deceptive. That's James's point here. He said they're being deceptive. They're saying those words hoping that it might fool God. That he might be manipulated to say, oh, look, they're saying all the right things. I think I will give it to them after all. It'd be like the person that God shows up to them just like Solomon. And he says, you know what? I decide I'm going to do something special. I only did this once. I did it with Solomon, but I'm going to do it with you because you're special and I love you. So I'm going to be a genie in the lamp. I'm going to give you one gift and whatever gift you want. And then you start thinking to yourself, I really want money. But I know from Solomon that he asked for wisdom. So if I ask for wisdom, God gave him also money and power. So I'll say wisdom so that I can get the money and power too. So God, I want wisdom. What's the hope really? What's the motive there? Money and power. Situation like that, God would say, fine, you have wisdom, but then no money, no power comes with it. And you go, God, I've been gypped. I did everything Solomon did. Why is his life different than mine? God says, because you would have taken the money and used it selfishly. You would have taken the money or the power and you would have used it to lord it over others. You would have made yourself president and just ran the university and ran the country, whatever you would have done. You would have just used it to control. You wouldn't have used it to help people grow. You would have used it for your own purposes, not for the kingdom. The kingdom would be no further impacted if you had that money and power. So God said, no. This happens sometimes within churches even. Churches say, God, we need more people. God, we want more people. We need to develop outreach programs so we can get more people. And the goal is not in the hearts of people that people might get saved and be rescued from their bondage and one-way ticket to hell. Instead, their goal is we need more people so that they will start tithing so that we won't close. The focus there then is on the church, not on the kingdom of God. The focus is about money, not salvation of people. It's love of our church over love of God, and therefore the Great Commission becomes a means to an end, not the end in itself. You see how this becomes a real serious issue. Some people may even say, God, I want a job, or I want a pay raise, or I want a better paying job, or I want some type of more money to come in because I want to provide for my family. And then God says, you're not fooling anyone. You would take all your paychecks and you would spend it on more DVDs, online games, you would spend it on toys that you currently can't afford. So why would I give you my resources for you to waste them? The answer is no. The answer is no. Now, not every time God says no is it about somebody having motive issues. So every time you see somebody having a no said to them, you can't jump to them and say, aha, you have sinful motives, don't you? To which that person can reply, no more sinful than yours. Because we are all sinners. We are all selfish. And when conflicts happen between us and others and us and God and us and whatever, we are all partially at fault. Okay, so we cannot look and judge other people's no's and yeses from God. We can just look and say, wow, God said no. He said no to me many times. I feel your pain. Let's intercede for each other. Let's try to help each other become more holy and get our lives on track and more holy and more about God. And if he keeps saying no, great, because that means that is most what is for his glory. God knows best. He knows that his no is best. Whether it's because of selfish motive or because a yes would just be destructive, would lead you down a selfish path. Some people can't handle power right, and they don't know it about themselves. And with pure motives and intentions, they say, God, give me a raise, give me a promotion. And God says no, because he knows that if he says no, you're going to stay humble. And if he says yes, you're going to fall. He knows best, and it's about his glory. It's about your relationship with him. Now, people struggle with this because we all have this selfishness inside of us. We all struggle with this. In fact, some people will even take that selfishness and they go to an extreme, and they do what's called retreating and isolation. Some people will retreat and isolate themselves. They will actually just cut themselves off. What they'll tend to say is something like this. If I have relationships and friendships and whatever, well, that leads to conflict, and conflict leads to pain. I don't want that pain, so therefore I'm not going to have the relationships. Usually these people come from homes that are very broken, filled with conflict, and they see that their parents fought all the time, or there was a divorce and they fought all the time, and they just say, I don't want that in my life, so I'm not going to have a family, let alone a marriage. And they isolate themselves. They don't let friends come close, because I've seen friends just tear at each other and betray each other, and I don't want that to happen to me, so therefore I'm not going to have any friends. I'm not going to take that risk. I'm not going to put myself out there. I'm just going to be by myself as myself right here. And the problem is, you're in conflict still with God. Because God says, I have not given you a spirit of fear. Paul even wrote that in 2 Timothy 1:7. Jesus did not call us with a spirit of fear, but one of power, love, and sound judgment. In other words, don't be afraid, risk. It will hurt, and risk some more. Get out there. Make disciples. Baptize them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, teaching them to follow the commands and teachings of Christ. It's a great commission. Have that boldness, have that courage to get out there. So many people are so afraid, what if I fail? What if I succeed beyond what I can handle? And they just have all this fear. And God says, thicken up and do it. Thicken up and do it. Quit being at conflict with God. Because basically a person that says, I'm too afraid to risk, is saying, I don't trust God with what he could do with the future. I don't trust him. So I have the authority to not risk. And I will isolate and I will retreat. You see that authority, trust, selfishness between us and God. God, I don't trust you. You're going to take me too far out of what I'm comfortable with. and I'm the authority here, and I'm not going. That brings to verse 4, where James lays it on the table. The ultimate desire, the ultimate issue. Verse 4, he says, "You adulterous people." Actually, the word should be just one word, and it's feminine. Adulteresses. You know what's interesting? When James writes to a church that is predominantly male that are going to be reading this, but there are women that are there, and he just calls a whole lot of them adulteresses. Not adulterers, not you adulterous people. It is adulteresses. It's a feminine word. Isn't that interesting? I don't know about you, but it gets my attention if my professor were to come up to me and say, "You adulteress." I'd be like, "Dude, what the heck? You got my attention now." What's going on? Okay, and he's not just doing it to get people's attention. He is saying this, "Oh, Church of Christ, you whore. You are having an affair upon God. You are called to be his people. You are called to go out in a ministry of mercy and grace and peace, reconciliation, restoration. You're called to be the hands and feet of God, and you are choosing to fight and be selfish and advance yourselves. You are choosing to isolate or retreat. You are choosing to uplift yourself in your own kingdom and your own agendas, not God's. You are playing idolatry here, you whore." That's what he's calling the church. You are having an affair from God. You're having an affair on him. You're putting all these other things in life as more important than your groom, which is Jesus. You'd rather have a relationship with somebody who is not godly than to be with Christ. You would rather take a job for your own advancement of significance rather than be focused on what Christ wants. You would rather sit at home and watch TV all day than to get out and meet people and be part of the kingdom of Christ. You would rather do all these things. You'd rather do it your way as you want. You'd rather do that than to be about the kingdom of Christ. And then you turn around and you say, "I did it for you, God." It's like a wife having an affair on her husband saying, "I did it for you so I could learn new tricks." Yeah, whatever. That is not the case. You can self-deceive all you want. So let's think about this for a minute. We're gathered here. Let's think about this for a minute. Ponder over the past year. You know what? I'll go a month with you. Let's just do the past month. Okay, let's just go over the past month. Just the past 30 days. Okay, and think over in your life, what conflicts have you had between you and another person, or you and God, you within yourself, internal, external, either way. What conflicts have you had? What have you been after? What have you tried to get but couldn't? And you're just at conflict with it. Is it you're trying to get a thing and you just can't afford it? You can't budget it out? Is it you're trying just to get money? Is it you're trying to get power or authority or to be called "I'm right" or that significance? Is it the power just to be heard? You're just looking just to have your voice heard. Whatever it is you are after, right or wrong, good motive, bad motive, I don't care. Or just throw that on the table on an equal plane for the moment, just for the sake of discussion. Okay, whatever it is that you've been striving for and not been successful. You're at conflict. It might not be a full-out war. There might not be a lot of name-calling or anything like that, but there is indeed conflict. There's an obstacle you cannot overcome. Okay? Now, got that in your head? Usually it comes pretty quick. And then we might go to something else in our head because we don't want to admit that we have something so quickly. And so we start going off. But whatever came to mind, hang on to that for a moment. Okay? Let that sit. That area of conflict. How much passion do you have about it? How important is it to you? How much energy have you poured in trying to solve it? trying to obtain whatever it is? How much passion, how much energy, how much effort, how much time have you committed to it? How much even money have you sacrificed for it, or thrown at it, or let go because of it? Whatever the case may be, how much have you given toward that conflict? Now, if you're anything like me, I'm sure you've given everything you've got. Because if it's important to you, you're going to put everything you've got into it. You're going to wake up middle of the night thinking about it. You're going to go to bed with your mind doing the monkey mind thinking, going from this thought to this thought to this thought, swinging back and forth. But it's going to seem to always grab onto that same branch every now and then come right back to that same branch and just swing to this thought, then back to that same branch as you're thinking, oh, look, I got this problem, I got this conflict, and squirrels and chocolate's yummy, but I got this conflict. Oh, I wonder what am I going to do tomorrow? What am I going to get for groceries? But I got this conflict. And you're just swinging back and forth, hanging on to that one branch, just devoting a lot of time, a lot of energy. Maybe you've talked to people. Maybe you've Googled the problem, trying to research a solution, and you're just really delving in. You're trying to figure it out. Now, James' adulterous comment comes, why don't you have that same desire and level of passion commitment for Christ? Why aren't you willing to put the same energy, the same time, the same commitment, the same gusto, the same everything you've got into serving the kingdom of Christ? If you put even 80% of what you put into your conflict, if you would put 80% of that into reaching a person for Christ, you would probably be successful. And it amazes me when I watch people go through their conflicts, and I watch people fight and quarrel, and even if they're tired and they're exhausted and they just have no energy to barely move, but yet when that conflict comes, there's this burst of energy from somewhere. They find a fight in them they didn't know they had, and suddenly it comes up. I find this in couples when they go through divorce. They find a fight they never knew they had. Suddenly there's passion in this marriage that hasn't been there in a really long time. I watch people when they argue with their bosses, and suddenly they have a passion that they never knew they had, and a fight that they've never known possible. Or they come home and they say, this person just said this on the news, and I'm fired up, and I'm just ticked off. I can't believe they said this, and on it goes. And I've had people, because of something I've said from the pulpit, they'll email, they'll chatter online. I can't believe the pastor just said this. I'm so enraged. And they find the passion. Well, can we use that passion for God's kingdom? Can we take that energy, take that time, take those resources and use it for the kingdom? To use it to show people grace and mercy and forgiveness and restoration in the name of Christ. Can we use that? Can we harness it? Can we point it and focus all those resources that way? But we don't. Why? Because we're selfish and we're adulteresses. That's how the church has become in our state, in our country. Not 100%, but a lot. They have become adulteresses. And so what happens is this. James gives one final thought. This is where we'll wrap up with our discussion. He gives one final thought before moving on to godly conflict. He says in verse 5, one of the hardest verses in the Bible to translate, I am not going to go through the conflicts that have existed trying to interpret this verse. I'm just going to give you which side of the plant I tend to fall on, or which side of the line I tend to plant my flag on. Translated something like this, or do you think it is without reason the scripture says that the Spirit living in us yearns jealously? It is not about the Holy Spirit. It is about our spirit. It is about our soul, our human spirit. God has given us a spirit, a human spirit, and due to the fall, due to sin, our spirits have become corrupt, twisted, sin corrupted, fallen, okay? That our spirit within us is indeed broken. And the natural inclination of the human spirit is toward envy. The natural desire of the human spirit that is broken and sin twisted is toward selfishness. That our spirit longs for itself, its own comfort, its own desires. It is selfish, it is jealous, it is envious, it is everything for itself. Okay, that's what is taking place here. We have what the Greeks would call concupiscence. Word I've used several times, but it's worth mentioning again. Concupiscence. It means we have an inner bias toward sin. We are all like that shopping cart at Meijer with a broken front wheel that when you push it, the cart continually wants to bend to the right or bend to the left. It doesn't want to go straight. And you have to work at it to keep it straight. That's our spirit that is within us. And people on average, do you think that Christian, non-Christian, doesn't matter? People on average, are they going to operate life out of godly wisdom or worldly wisdom? Worldly wisdom. That is the natural. We learned that over the past couple weeks. Worldly wisdom. They do not use their knowledge and the resources for the God's glory. They use it for self-glory, self-advancement, self-goals and agendas. Okay, so they use it for themselves. So people tend to live life with a broken spirit, with a broken wheel, go in the wrong direction, and then they make their choices and all their passions and their energies to help push that cart the wrong direction. The way it's already bent to go. That is what James is getting at. And if I do ask God to give me wisdom, it is out of selfish motives. If I do ask God to help me to have a better life, to have better whatever, it is out of that selfish ambition. Oh, what it would look like if the church could really have Jesus be their number one. Oh, what it would look like if the church in one voice made God's agenda their agenda. His passions their passions. If people would choose to organize their relationships in such a way for God's glory. That we would look at someone, I mean, if you think about it, even the whole system of dating has gleaned us towards selfishness. Have you ever thought about that? The whole dating process, if you say, well, I'm not dating, but even the existence of dating in American culture still influences us towards selfishness. Because think about it. When you go out on a date, the goal is, how does this person make me feel? Do I like this person? And do I like how we're having fun with this person? And on it goes. And it's all about self and how I am with this person and what I'm like with this person. Do they bring out the best in me and whatnot? And then if we really, really like them, we want to spend more time with them. And it's all selfish and ground. And then you get married. Then there's what's called the marriage dip. Have you ever felt that? The marriage dip. And you wonder, why is it life married is not as fun and as enriching and as growing as what the dating was? Why did it dip? Because marriage shows us how selfish we are. That's what it does. Okay? And so we realize that we've been all about self. And once you get married, it takes a good 9 to 15 years. That's how social science records this. It takes 9 to 15 years before you can ever even begin truly having a we versus an I. So the first 15 years of marriage, you got a lot of I going on, a lot of selfishness going on. You might say the word we, you might do all that, you aren't fooling anyone. Selfishness is there. And it's going, and it's growing, and it takes a long time. This is why, by the way, that after 15 years, why you find people that are married for 50 years, and they say that our marriage is better than it's ever been, because they have succumbed to no longer being selfish. That's why they say marriage gets better as time goes on, because you're not selfish anymore, and life becomes so much more peaceful. Doesn't mean there's not conflict. I mean, you got, married how many years? Yeah, how many years? 69 years. Married 69 years. He's sitting there saying, you're right. You're absolutely right. He's just nodding with full agreement. 69 years married. See, that's what I'm talking about. And I know you guys. Some of the most unselfish man I've ever met. Okay, and was he always that way? Not from the stories from his wife. Okay, and but our spirit longs to be selfish. It does. And oh, what it would be like if we could say, I will give that up and let Christ's agenda be my agenda. That Christ alone will be my hope. That he alone will be my salvation. He alone will be my kingdom. I'm a citizen of his kingdom, not my own. That he alone is my purpose and my meaning, my strength, my shield. That I find that in him and him alone. Not in my abilities, not in my attempts. I couldn't even come close to what he can provide and what he has as an agenda. Oh, that we could just be like that. Oh, what the church would look like. Oh, what would happen in this nation. I mean, look at it. When you look at Jesus and his disciples, and during the whole year of Jesus' ministry with them, they were a selfish lot. They were a bitter, envious, covetous lot, and there was a lot of strife, a lot of problems. But what happened to the world when Jesus died and rose again, and they removed the selfishness from themselves? They still struggled with it. They were not perfect. But as they began to remove it, what happened to the world? Imagine what could happen to our families, to our communities, our neighborhoods, our city, if churches removed that and followed Christ alone.